It is hot out here, but it's a beautiful day. And as I was completing my workout, this thought came to my mind, and I thought I should make a video about it because it's a profound download. It's a truth, and I want to share it because maybe it can help somebody just as much as it helped me. And a lot of things that we experience, if we're wise, or at least attempting to learn from everything, we tend to process things and analyze it and see how we could fit ourselves into that same position, right? Like, where in my life am I like this? Where in my life have I been like this? Where am I tempted to be this way? And so I'm going to share something about a past neighbor of mine when I lived in Ypsilanti. She was an older lady, probably late 50s, late 60s, somewhere in there. And she was always smoking. I mean, chain smoking. And a lot of times I'm kind of antisocial. She obviously was kind of antisocial. So when we would see each other, it would be like a lot of avoidance, right? But one day in particularly, we ran across paths. I was in a good mood that day. I was dancing, listening to music, and she smiled. And we started to have a conversation. And we talked for about, maybe 40 minutes. And so in the conversation, we shared a lot about our lives. We had been living next to each other for about a year or so, and we hadn't talked. And so she was telling me about her addiction, right, to cigarettes, and how long she's been addicted to it, how it started, so forth and so on. So I shared my past addiction to Black and Milds and different things like that. And she was talking about how much she wanted to change, so forth and so on. And I tend to try to just listen and not say too much, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't want to come off like I know everything. And so I just listen, and, whenever I could throw a little suggestion in there, I would do it. And so from that day on, we would speak daily, right? And her apartment was right next to mine. So sometimes I would have my window open, right? And I would have my window open, and I would just hear somebody making like these grueling coughing sounds. And I mean, it was bad. And it traumatized me because it took me back to the time when my grandfather, who also smoked, drank, did everything under the sun until his dying day. It took me back to that place because I was living with my granny at the time. And so it took me back to that place where I slept literally like right next to him, right? And in his last days, you can hear the fluids going up and down in his body. And that sound, got louder and louder and louder until one day it just stopped. Obviously, we know what happened when it stopped. It was over. He was, that morning, he was gone, right? But it was just the sound of just agony and pain and death. Now, I don't know if this lady has cancer or not. I don't know. But what I do know is that she was fully functional. She worked on her yard, all this other stuff. She did all this stuff. But she would smoke. And then I would hear this sound. And it would just be like, it sounded like it was just so painful for her. It sounded like she just hated that experience. But she loved it to smoke. She just had to smoke. She hated that experience, but she loved to smoke. Why do I say that? because I feel like humans, a lot of times, no matter how we got there, because I know how we tend to get to these places, trauma, coping mechanisms, disappointments, depressions, anxiety, boredom, breakups. We all know typically how this stuff starts. It starts when you're a kid, when you're younger, and not being on purpose, not knowing where you're going. That's how, I smoked my first black and I didn't have my first drink because I had already been drinking a lot, and I was only about 11. And so we know how we get here, but the problem is we stay here, right? We will marinate in this agony, in this pain for years and years and years of time, of suffering and shame and guilt and remorse and lost dreams and aspirations for years, for very minute moments of instant gratification or escapism or pleasure, right? Because those cigarettes, there's no way that they could be as pleasurable as that pain was that I would hear in that woman's body when she would be in there making those noises. And then she would come out, she'd be normal and do what she do. But I would hear it from time to time. And so I said, how does this relate to me? This is me, you, others. Put the addiction there. It doesn't matter. The addiction could be social media. The addiction could be gambling. The addiction could be sex. The addiction can be heroin. The addiction can be lean. The addiction can be the site. It can be work. It can be, put whatever addiction there. The addiction does not matter. The reality is the pain has to outweigh the pleasure, because the pain of all my addictions always outweighed the pleasure. And a guy who I follow on YouTube named Sean G, he said something that always stuck with me. You're not going to change until you just sick and tired of yourself. You just can't stand it. You so fed up with yourself. You know what I'm saying? And it just outweighs everything. And I've realized the older I get, how much more right he is, because I see people all around me with great gifts, with great potential, with dreams, with wisdom. They're wise. Like, they have talents, they have abilities, they have things to offer. But these addictions, they got them gripped up. Gripped like a python, just locked, suffocating the life out of them until there's no more life left. And that's what addiction is trying to do to you. And addiction is trying to do to me. And that's why I am fighting. That's why I am adamant about being intentional. That's why I decided to come on this particular channel and be my authentic, real self and share the things that I feel need to be said, regardless of the point. Because I feel like it needs to be heard by people who are on a journey, who want to start a journey, or who are trying to keep a journey. Whichever place you fit. I fit it in all three of those categories, and I've restarted all three of those categories, and I've ended all three of those categories. Whatever. It doesn't matter. We're all human, right? And so when I share that story, I'm not sharing that story to cast judgment on that woman, because I empathize with her and I understand how a person can stay in active addiction until they die. I totally understand it because life is a real battle. But at some point, we gotta want better. That's all I got. Peace.